Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to NEWSROOM. I'm your host, Khalid. But today is the 17th of August 2022, and these are the stories that we'll be discussing in detail during the course of the show. We'll begin, ladies and gentlemen, with the protests that have been emanating from the Sikh parties as well as from the different other parties as far as the atrocities that are being committed by the Indians in Indian-held occupied Jammu and Kashmir are concerned, and others, whether it be Sikhs or the Kashmiris, both have held joint protests in the United Kingdom in different cities and have shown their resolve to fight against these barbarities that have been perpetrated by the Indian government. Is this going to have some kind of an effect on the international bodies, on India? This is going to be our first segment. Our second story of the day, ladies and gentlemen, concerns Afghanistan and the economic meltdown as far as that country is concerned. Whether on the one hand we are seeing the effects on the general Afghan public, the women, the children and the men, as far as the lack of food is concerned, the lack of incentives is concerned, the lack of resources is concerned. On the other hand, we also have the United States that refuses to disperse the 3.5 billion US dollars to Afghanistan because of Ayman al-Zawahiri. Will this go forward as some kind of a further economic meltdown for Afghanistan? Will there be some kind of a middle ground where the West will be able to help Afghanistan come out of the current crisis? This is going to be our second story, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns the protests against the Indian atrocities in Indian illegally held occupied Jammu and Kashmir that happened jointly by the Kashmiris and by the Sikhs in the United Kingdom. What kind of effect is this going to have on the British policy towards India or to India? More in the following report.
3 years after BJP government revoked Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir's constitutional status, the repressive policies to strangulate freedom movement are escalating. Since 2019, the security forces have been committing numerous abuses, including routine harassment and ill treatment at checkpoints, arbitrary detentions, and extrajudicial killings. The repressive measures and broader pattern of systematic infringements of fundamental rights used against the local population, as well as of intimidation, searches and confiscations committed by Indian forces have rendered the occupied valley as the world's largest prison. As India celebrated its Independence Day, the Kashmiri and Sikh communities in the world held a number of protest demonstrations to highlight grave human rights abuses by India. The Tehreek-e-Kashmir UK also arranged a digital van which displayed messages of brutalities and human rights violations by Indian forces in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Different organizations representing the British Sikhs and Kashmiris held a joint protest in front of the Indian High Commission in London, and the protesters were holding banners and placards and chanted slogans for independent Khalistan and free Kashmir. Kashmiri and Sikh community across the world declared 15th of August as Black Day and chanted slogans against Indian illegal occupation in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The constitutional and illegal imperialist measures taken by Narendra Modi-led fascist Indian government jeopardize peace of the entire region.
Dr. Mujahid Gillani, who is a Kashmiri leader, joins us online. Dr. Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. Dr. Gillani, when it comes to the barbarities that are being perpetrated by the Indian authorities and the Indian forces in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, it's no hidden secret, but what is also not a secret is the fact that no tangible action is being taken by the world body. Now, these protests that have been happening across the world on the eve of Indian Independence Day by the Sikhs, by the Kashmiris across the world and in the United Kingdom as well, is this going to have any effect on the foreign policy of countries such as the United Kingdom towards India?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, thank you and grateful for having me. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are, sir.
Thank you, Omar. See, first of all, the most important thing is that remembrance is existence. For once, if we understand that any date that concerns the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, or per se the state of Jammu and Kashmir, be it the 8th of July, be it the 5th of August, be it the 13th of July, any of these dates, and even the observance of 15th of August as the Black Day is a very important incident and event. We must understand that relating ourselves to these dates keeps our struggle alive. Telling the world, telling the prosperous world, telling the people and the international community which matters that 15th of August is a date is a date which is celebrated by a country that calls itself a rising and shining and a great democratic country. But on the other hand, take a look at the people which are considered as an integral part, so called integral part, by that country, and yet the people are protesting right in the center of UK, right in the center of US, or right in the center of Geneva to tell the people that we have been illegally occupied, that India is not only an occupier, but India is an illegal occupier, an oppressor, and an absolute hegemonic fidelity. This is
Now,
important to understand that these are the days that keep our resistance, our struggle very much alive.
this struggle, this resistance by the Kashmiri people, whether it be within Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir and across the world, is quite apparent to us in Pakistan at least. Is it equally apparent to the foreign policy makers across the globe, in the European Union, in the United Kingdom, in the United States of America, the countries that matter as far as pressurizing India to change its tactics vis-a-vis Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir?
See, what we need to do, and I've been saying this previously as well, that we need to project the Kashmir stories. We understand that after 2016, the New York Times was compelled essentially to term the mass use of pellet guns in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir as the epidemic of dead eyes. And then was the Washington Post, and then all of the other international newspapers and article writers who termed and used Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir in their articles very frequently. This is important to understand that the people on the ground have paid for this with their lives, blood, and sweat, essentially to highlight the Kashmir issue internationally. But the people outside Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir need to maintain that momentum. For once, if the human fatigue settles in, if the conflict zone fatigue settles in, the people living in the prosperous world will tend to forget about what is happening in Kashmir. Continuous hammering of whatever is happening, continuous protests, regular article writings, thesis writings, awareness campaigns need to be carried out in whatever place of the world where it matters for the people of the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir.
You talk of maintaining momentum, Dr. Gillani. Which measures, in your point of view, need to be taken to maintain this momentum? We know that the Kashmiri diaspora across the world is very agitated at these brutalities, is very concerned about these brutalities. At the same time, it needs to also get the message across to the necessary quarters so that the changes might happen within India at the level of the Muslims, at the level of the Muslims of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. How aggressive does this momentum need to be for that to happen?
See, we need to divide this actually. Your question, I believe, encompasses a major and a bigger, diverse answer. For once, we need to understand that Pakistan is the sole advocate of the people of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The youth of Pakistan needs to be on board. And for once, you need to internalize the Kashmir issue. You need to tell the people of Pakistan what exactly Kashmir means to Pakistan. Who was Sayyid Ali Gilani? Who is Sayyida Asya Andrabi Masrat Alam Bhat? You need to tell the people, the youth of Pakistan firstly, because this is the youth that actually represents Pakistan in the outside world as well. The students studying in different universities of Pakistan essentially go over to Turkey, to Europe, to US on Fulbright scholarships or half-Bright scholarships or any other kind of essentially facilitations where they represent Pakistan. They are the ones who are going to represent Pakistani and the true narrative of Kashmir across in the world as well. Then secondly comes over, we have the aspect of diaspora, the Kashmiri and the Pakistani diaspora. And both these essentially can bring up and project the Kashmir issue very, very fervently because they are the ones who have suffered. The people from Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir who now reside in UK, US, or in Turkey, or per se any place else in the world, are the ones who have suffered these stories, who have suffered the brutality of the Indian occupation. And projecting them forward, letting them tell their own stories to anyone, any of the parliamentarians, is going to have a real impact. And that is what we have seen so till now. in
I
the
think
form
that
of
impact is
newspaper
extremely
articles.
important, Dr. Mujahid Gillani. Until that impact does not happen, real change will not be able to be perceived not only by the people across the world, but also the pressure on India. We've also been joined by Gurpreet Singh, who's a Sikh for Justice coordinator for the United Kingdom. Gurpreet Singh, thank you very much to have joined us. We've seen the protests that the Sikh community has also had along with the Kashmiris in the United Kingdom, as far as the rights of the people are concerned, whether it be that the rights for the Kashmiris or the rights for the Sikhs in India. The Khalistan movement is also gaining momentum. We've seen the referendums that have happened in different countries as well. We've also seen that on the eve of the 15th of August in India, the Sikh community preferred to hold Khalistan flags rather than the Indian flags. How is the fight for a separate homeland for the Sikh community moving along?
Well, I separate your, first of all, it's my pleasure to be in the show. And what I want to say is your question, I separate into two scenarios. One is the political, and the second is the human rights. When we talk about 15th or 14th August, that is, you can say it's a protest, but it's not a protest. From the Sikhs and the Kashmiris' point of view, they go there and they pay the tribute of the United Punjab, which has been partitioned, and so many people has been killed. It's in millions, and we go there and pay the tribute on both sides. People who lost their life in this partition by the mistake of the politicians' agenda, and they were the totally innocent people. And they want, at that time, they want the freedom in order to live from the British imperialism and the British state. And then, for the same political scenario, they've been butchered, slaughtered, and you know, I don't want to go ahead with this anymore. Or I'm just concluding this.
Gurpreet Singh Saab, let's come to the state of affairs as far as the Sikh community within India is concerned. We've seen the farmers' protest. We've seen how the Indian government reacted to that. The names that have been called to the Sikh community within India, the way they are marginalized within India, their rights are curtailed within India. Is the Sikh community rising up to the occasion and rising up to these, of course, the way the Indian government is treating their community, not since now, but since quite some time?
You are absolutely right. We not get this treatment like 1947, then 1984, and present time. When we talk about Punjab, we bring the scenario of the Kashmir. They are in the same position as we are. And when we talk about, like Dr. Saab was talking, when we are overseas Punjabis, Sikhs, and Kashmiris, we are a joint front in we tackle Indian brutality and their impression overseas in these countries. When we're talking about overseas, in Kashmir and in Punjab, they are occupied, and their brutalities are coming from, you can see Asia Watch, Amnesty International. But the beauty about Kashmiris and Punjabis are, even though in India there is a Nagaland, Manipur, Sikkim, even 7 sister states, they also want the independence, and their genocide has been committed. But the thing is, these two communities joined hand in hand. We tackling India very professional on an international stage, and we are one step ahead than Kashmir in order to secure the referendum and going to the right direction under the United Nations guidelines. And the referendum is happening as we speak. 3 countries has been concluded: England, Switzerland, and Italy, which is last month, and September in Canada, this referendum is starting.
All right. Coming to you, Dr. Gillani, we've seen how the Sikh community and the Kashmiri community united as far as the protest in the United Kingdom is concerned. Both have legitimate concerns. Both have some commonalities as far as the denial to their rights to freedom, their rights as human beings and their rights as communities is concerned. Dr. Gillani, is the West listening? And if the West is listening, will a time come when they will take some kind of an action on India, or do you feel there is going to be a status quo as far as Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, or as far as the rights of the Sikh community within India is concerned?
See, I believe we need to divide our efforts into this. If you're talking about at an individual level, whatever the Sikh community is doing, whatever the Kashmiris across the world are doing, they're doing absolutely great. They are actually denying and they're actually defeating this defeated narrative that the whole world is not listening to the Kashmiris. The world is listening to the Kashmiris, and we have an evidence in the form of the 2018 and 2019 United Nations human rights reports as well. And even the genocide itself had issued a genocide alert to the whole world that
Genocide Watch,
commit
yes.
genocide in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So for once, the world is listening if the Kashmiris are allowed to speak and speak vehemently about it. One. Two, at a state level, perhaps the story is a little different. Yes, Pakistan has been supporting Kashmiris morally, diplomatically, and politically, but the more important thing is that the stronger Pakistan gets, it guarantees the freedom to Kashmir. This is very important that right now as we speak, India has carried out a campaign of Har Ghar Tiringa, and particularly carried out a rally in the Lal Chowk of Srinagar, where many hundreds of people, hundreds of RSS and goons and Indians were brought in from outside to carry out this Tiringa or the tricolor, unfurl the tricolor in the heart of Srinagar, which was never done before. Srinagar is essentially a Pakistani city where always and every time the green colored flag has been unfurled and hoisted. This is very important to understand that India in itself has become a complete brutal, hegemonic and savage power within the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. This is a story, and these stories need to come up.
And these stories need to be told again and again. In this whole scenario, there's also India and its continuous, desire and also push to quash the movements, whether it be that of the Kashmiris for Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, or that be of the Sikh community for their rights as well. When it comes to Kashmir, as far as the KMS is concerned, there are reports of expanding the gang of killers known as the Village Defence Guards to the entire Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. These are of course armed by the Indian Army to instill a sense of fear amongst the public through death and destruction. How devastating is this as well, as an addition to all the other impacts that the Indian government and the Indian forces are perpetrating to the people in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir?
To be really honest, Omar, we Kashmiris don't expect the Indian authorities to give us any kind of rights, sense of security, or safeguard at all. We Kashmiris have been oppressed by the very same Indians, be it a force of 700,000, be it a force of 900,000, be it a force of even more than that, more than 1 million Indian forces that are actually militarizing the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. For once, to be really honest and clear about it, we know that every Indian who is instilled by the authorities in and on our land is essentially an occupier, be it the village defense committees, be it the Sena colonies, and let's be very honest, be it those Kashmiri Pandits who are on the payrolls of BSF or RAW and are essentially working against the Kashmiri community. Let me clarify this as well, that working together with Sikhs, even Christians and Dalits, makes this issue a humanitarian tragedy. This is not just the Muslims of the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, as we have seen in the Nadi Marg and the Chitty Singhpura massacre. It is essentially all the minority communities that are being targeted by the RSS mindset and the Hindutva mindset of the current, particularly the current BJP government. Otherwise, it's been essentially there since 1947, when India occupied the territory of Jammu and Kashmir illegally.
All right, Gurpreet Singh Saab, coming to the perspective of the Sikh community within India, is there any possibility, because Dr. Gillani talked about all the minorities that are being subjected to such tactics, especially the Muslims, but also the Sikhs and the Christians and the Dalits. Is there any possibility for all the minorities to get together as one and have a united stand against these RSS policies, against the Modi-led government? Because united, of course, everybody becomes stronger. Divided, there's a huge quote: "Divided we fall, united we stand." What is your take on that? Is there any possibility of that in the future?
Very much. I tell you, there used to be a united Punjab. Once the Indian Punjab has been split into 3 states, which is Haryana, then Himachal further on, after the partition. But now, if you see the farmer protest in Delhi, which lasted nearly a year or so, the whole Indian state farmers got together in Delhi against the new bills which they were proposing in the parliament. And you can see the outcome of that protest. The people, when the Punjab, we as a SFJ, we have declared the map of independent Punjab. And you'd be surprised, most of the Indian states, they don't want to stay with India. And they wish and they're hoping, once the Punjab become independent, we don't want to stay with India as a state. And they want to join Punjab as a joint country. So this is the beauty of those people. They have shown their courage and their intentions. They want to live with the Sikhs. And even when you say Sikhs, well, Punjab is 50% of the Sikhs, the rest of the communities living there. So the new outcome, the new proposition in India is the other states wants to become independent in Punjab rather than staying with India.
All right, Gurpreet Singh sir, what I was trying to understand is there any possibility in the future for the Dalits, for the Sikhs, for the Christians, for the Muslim communities, for the Kashmiris to stand up as one against their respective rights for their communities within India? We've seen that happening in the United Kingdom. Can that happen within India? Because if the more you are together, the more pressure you could put on India, because as we speak, there is a pressure that is being put by the expat communities in the United Kingdom and other countries. But within India would be another thing altogether, wouldn't it be, Gurpreet Singh Saab?
It depends. If we analyzing, when we see the Indian media, it's sensitive. They only want to show the things they want to show to the people. In reality, the farmer protest is the example. The books has been written on that. All sort of people, all different languages, different religion, different castes, they got together in the farmer protest, and they shown the solidarity in order to push back India, the law which they have passed in the parliament. And Modi is known as non-shakeable. Any parliament law has been passed in India, they never withdraw, except one, the farmer law. This and the Sikhs are, let me tell you one thing, I need to remind this very carefully. The Sikhs are only 2% in India as a whole population. So all people from even Muslims, Hindus, Christians, farmers, and Dalits even were part of that protest. They shown the solidarity, and the narrative and the outcome came from there is, once Punjab become independent, which will be very soon, and they want to join a hand with the Punjab, and they will support Punjab to become independent. And let me remind you one thing, when the referendum goes to Punjab, and the voting will happen even in Haryana, in Jammu, and Punjab is a 50% Sikh state. Himachal and Jammu is a majority Hindu state. So they're going to vote for it, for their independence to join Punjab as an independent country.
All right, all right. Coming back to you, my last question to you, Dr. Mujahid Gillani. We've also heard very strange reports of, the 11 Hindus that had been convicted of charges of gang rape of Bilkis Bano in 2002. They have been set free. This and so many other, it reminds us of so many other such incidents of rape, of incarceration, of jailing of Kashmiri leaders, of denying any kind of right to the people in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, all the voices that are being muted, whether it be of journalists and of other human rights activists. What kind of measures do you feel that the Kashmiris within India and outside of India with other communities such as the Sikh community could go with in order to change the current way the Indian government is moving along with the judiciary in India?
So once again, when we talk about India as a state, as somebody who wields and yields power in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, we must understand that we Kashmiris don't consider India as a legal entity. And if it's not a legal entity, it doesn't have the power to unveil any of its laws in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, particularly through its judiciary. We consider the Indian judiciary essentially as a tool for a miscarriage of justice and as an accomplishment for the Indian heinous designs that whatever it hatches in the New Delhi and are accomplished through its courts in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The only way that we can actually get a legal assistance is outside India through a system that is completely impartial, unbiased, free, and fair, and can actually see this zone as a conflict zone and not as an integral part of the Indian dominion where the Indian laws can be enacted or enforced. Because for once, if you consider India as a legal entity, then Masrat Alam Butt and Dr. Qasim Paktu are essentially terrorists. Then a human rights activist such as Khurram Parvez needs to be jailed. But then, if you talk about the world powers and understand that Kashmir is a conflict zone, then Sayyida Asya Andrabi and Dr. Qasim Paktu or even Burhan Muzaffar Wani are freedom fighters, fighting for their just right, and that is backed by the United Nations. This is what we need to do outside the Indian dominion on a free and impartial platform, which needs to be the world, the prosperous world, be it the United Nations, the ICJC, or the ICC, anywhere where we can expect some justice for the people of Kashmir.
And justice, of course, is something that is imminently needed for the Kashmiris, for the Sikhs, for the Dalits, and for the Christians. And of course, the movements will continue till such time that this freedom and this justice is attained, whether it be in form of referendums or whether it be in form of the right to self-determination. Thank you very much, Dr. Mujahid Gillani Saab. Thank you very much, Gurpreet Singh Saab, to have joined us on this platform to talk about the rights of the Kashmiri community and the Sikh community within India and the movements that have been going forward and moving forward as far as giving these people their due rights is concerned. Let's come to our second segment, and that concerns Afghanistan and of course the dire humanitarian economic conditions that it is embroiled in. At the same time, we've heard that the US has refused to disperse the $3.5 billion to the Afghans, citing the recent incident of Ayman al-Zawahiri. What is this going to move forward as far as the current economic situation in Afghanistan is concerned? Is there any respite in view? More in the following report.
Afghanistan has been grappling with a grave humanitarian crisis since hasty US withdrawal followed by Western sanctions. According to the United Nations, 95% of Afghans are going hungry. It's a catastrophe that worsened after the fall of Kabul 1 year ago, exacerbated by the US decision to freeze the Afghan central bank's assets and the international sanctions that have crippled an already fragile economy. International aid accounted for 80% of the Afghan state budget, but it was cut off upon the Taliban victory, prompting economic collapse and depriving many Afghans of basic necessities. The Biden administration announced that it will not release $3.5 billion in frozen Afghan funds, citing the discovery of al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri in Kabul. The International Rescue Committee, in a press release, said that since the shift in power in Afghanistan, economic collapse is steering the country towards a humanitarian crisis. The press release of IRC further stated that various causes, including the reduction in development aid, the freezing of bank reserves, and the grounding of the banking sector, are behind the economic collapse in Afghanistan. Earlier, US and Taliban officials have exchanged proposals for the release of billions of dollars frozen abroad into a trust fund. Significant difference between the two sides remain.
Javed Hassan Saab, who's an economic columnist, joins us online. Javed Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. Javed Saab, with the US now not dispersing the $3.5 billion, but at the same time saying that it wants to help Afghanistan, what kind of resultant economic situation do we see Afghanistan going into?
There's huge amount of suffering. The poverty levels have increased by something like 30% just in the last few months. Over the last 1 year, the banking system is not working because of the $9 billion that was seized by the US and European central banks. So effectively, there's very little trade that can take place. So that's affecting livelihoods. So this is quite severe. They were looking forward to this $3 billion being released by the US. 3.5 billion that was going to be released by the US. US has used the what shall I say? Reason being that Ayman al-Zawahiri was found in Afghanistan, and that seems like a sad.
A violation of the Doha Agreement, basically. This is what the US is citing. Nevertheless, I understand the US concerns as well, Javed Saab, but what happens to Afghanistan? Is there a parallel mechanism to move forward with in order to help the people? Because I understand the grievances that the US and the West has with the Afghan Taliban, but is that the fault of the Afghan people?
It certainly is not the fault of the Afghan people. We have to understand the vast majority are apolitical, they are normal citizens, and the worst affected are the poorest sections of society. And they are seeing up to 50% hike in prices. There's starvation now beginning to take place. Both World Food Health Organization and World Health Organization are talking about increased health incidences. So really, it's not the Afghan people that should be penalized for something that the Taliban regime
you were talking about statistics. I'd like to quote some for the record. 20 million people, half of the Afghan population, are suffering from food insecurity. 95% of the population in Afghanistan does not have enough food to eat, as far this is a statement by the World Food Program. More than 1 million children under the age of 5 suffer from acute and prolonged malnutrition. In central Afghanistan, in the Ghor province, the WFP says that thousands of people are facing level 5 catastrophic acute food insecurity, which is the highest level short of a famine. And of course, they talk of other parts of Afghanistan also that are embroiled in similar conditions. How can the world not stay silent on this and not work to move forward at a rapid pace to curtail this?
I think it's critically important that the world and Pakistan shout out about this. I think it's a duty of all Islamic countries to make a great deal about this. You've mentioned the food shortage. With food shortage, inevitably you have health concerns. We have to remember also there's a deficiency of medical supplies there now taking place. So effectively, medical treatment is not available in large parts of Afghanistan. So it's a combination of issues now beginning to take place. With that, water supply is also being affected. So it's really dreadful conditions that people are having to suffer. They will be in very short period, if the world doesn't rise up to the concerns there will be large number of unfortunately fatalities that will start taking place. I don't know how many children are already being affected in terms of malnourishment and deficiency in growth. So really, this is a global catastrophe that is taking place. Everyone and every organ should be mobilized to make a lot of noise about this. It is something which is, I think, the most pertinent global crisis that is taking place. And yes, one can understand U.S. concern or Western concerns about the presence of Ayman al-Zawahiri. but it really should not be used as a tool to punish the people, the Afghan people, and that's what
But
effectively is happening.
that's not the only thing. Not only is there a security concern, there's also the concern about the rights of the women and the girls, as far as their rights, as far as the right to education is concerned, that are not being given to them, not since now, but since quite some time by the Afghan Taliban. This is also a huge concern that the European Union has leveled on the Afghan government. This is a huge concern that other countries in the West have also labeled. This coupled with the Ayman al-Zawahiri issue has caused a huge turmoil in the West as far as how to help Afghanistan is concerned, whether on the one hand the 3.5 billion US dollars are hereby suspended till further notice. There's also talks of establishment of an international trust fund as far as the quote by a National Security Council spokesperson is concerned, to help the Afghan people. Can a trust fund for the Afghan people or a development fund for Afghanistan help as a parallel solution to the current crisis?
I think it's been mentioned recently, apart from the trust fund, they're looking to use Islamic funds and Islamic agencies to channel money into Afghanistan. I think every avenue should be explored. I think the Afghan Taliban regime should look into actually opening up education for young ladies. This is unacceptable. This is something Pakistan itself was expecting soon after there was the change, that there should be women's education. This is something that as much persuasion should be applied. But irrespective of that, I think the charitable funds plus the other vehicles that are being set up, they should be used to channel as much of the money as is possible to the people directly, even if the Taliban regime is to be excluded. What cannot happen is such large numbers of people, especially children, being denied access to food and basic health facilities, and that's what effectively is happening. So I mean, let's look at it, the perverse nature of this, because if we assume that one of the reasons is that girls are not being educated, they should not also be starved. Let's put it as simply as that. We should not have a double jeopardy imposed upon the girls in Afghanistan.
I totally agree with you on that, and that is what we're trying to discuss, and that is what we're trying to highlight, so that people in the concerned circles understand that. I hope they do. Nevertheless, Pakistan has been highlighting the Afghan cause since quite some time on the international arena. Can, in your point of view, other Islamic countries, like for example Qatar, where the Doha Agreement took place and where the Afghan Taliban had met with the US and also lately met again, as well as other countries like the United Arab Emirates, could help mediate with the Afghan Taliban and the West some kind of a solution to move forward as far as this current crisis, economic and otherwise?
I think Qatar has played a major role in bringing about the Doha Agreement. It is incumbent on it that it plays a major role right now, where we face a crisis situation. So the Doha offices should be renewed to ensure that there's funds channeled into Afghanistan. I think Taliban should be willing to, from what I have heard, the Taliban should be willing to listen to such intermediation. I think Pakistan and other Islamic countries have a role to play in this also. It is really dire conditions, and I think the Taliban will be willing to accommodate wherever it's possible.
Now, Javed Saab, one of the major reasons why the $3.5 billion have not yet been dispersed to the Afghan Taliban is, of course, as we have talked about, Ayman al-Zawahiri. Why do you, in your point of view, have the Afghan Taliban not been able to stay true to what they had decided in the Doha Agreement with the United States, that no terrorist element will be harbored within Afghanistan that could be used against any other country, and B, that they will also try to root out any such elements within Afghanistan? Why hasn't the Afghan Taliban been able to do so? Is it because a lack of will? Is it B, because of the maintenance of ties with such elements? Or C, because of the fact they don't even have enough economic resources to stand on their own? So how can they do work on other aspects? What's your take on this?
I think probably it's the last more than anything else. their resources are very stretched. They have been there for a year. They have been basically getting things in order, restoring peace. So I think they don't mean to renege on the agreement or the clauses of the agreement. I think it's less lack of will and more probably a certain degree of chaotic nature of the government that has taken place. And I think rather than taking an extremely harsh view, the international order or international countries should be persuaded that there should be some leeway given to a regime that is still finding its feet. I know it's 1 year, but really we should not assume that there is bad faith in this case. One thing they should be pressurized to do is to ensure that women's education is brought back, because that is something the Taliban had promised repeatedly, and so far hasn't happened.
All right, final question, but I'd like a very quick answer to that, a very short answer to that. Who, in your point of view, or which organization, in your point of view, now in this current situation where there's a lack of trust between the West and the Afghan Taliban, should control the cash reserves that would or could come into Afghanistan?
I think a mixture of, say, the Islamic Development Bank, that could be a channel that could be used, or one of the Arab central banks that could be used. Even the Qatari central bank could be very useful in this case.
All right. Thank you very much, Javed Hassan Saab, to have joined us, to have talked to us about the current situation in Afghanistan and the way to move forward under this current situation of mistrust between the West and Afghanistan. With that, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with news stories and segments that pertain to us, you and Pakistan. Stay safe, follow the SOPs. Allah Hafiz.